Hi there, it's William Hall. I'm going to offer a session, a demo session about theater, about the world of improvisational theater. And I think what we're looking at there, and I invite you to attend, I think it's going to be interesting, is how the theater allows us to sort of shift who we are, at least in a kind of pretend way. It's like trying something on. And so through that lens of stepping into this perhaps sacred space of the theater, that we can sort of change who we are and kind of experience what life is like with that sort of framing, with that framing. So come for some experiments and come to see what's possible there.
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
Good.
Great.
Do you want a different one, or is that okay?
No, but okay.
Okay.
Great. So now I will have a few questions to you. Some of them will be, of course, about your work. Some of them will be about the theater and improvisation. I will ask about provocative approach because, the Congress is dedicated mostly to that topic. So maybe let's start with that question. Had you ever had the opportunity to explore the provocative approach, techniques, or ways of working?
Some of the work I've done in the past has been provocative in its nature. It's not, I don't label it provocative, but some of the work we do becomes provocative in a way. And I can explain a little bit about that. It's kind of interesting. And just by the way, my background when I was at university, I studied psychology, and it was psychology, theater, and theater won out. I think maybe I have a rich social life because of that. But so the idea of what the psychology of theater is has always been interesting to me. So some of the work does become provocative. In a simple way, if you're playing the villain of a particular scene or play, then you have to embody that villainness. And so you walk in those shoes. And for the professional actor, the job is to make the work truthful. And where we search for the truthfulness is often inside. And so we have to go inside to pull up something different than the way we normally show up. And so it becomes provocative in that way. And the nature of the relationship of the actors to a director, the director is pushing, cajoling, nudging, and provoking the actors to get a kind of performance. And we see that in my work as well.
Good.
Okay. Was it? Okay, good.
Good. Yes, it was. So you're an actor, you're a trainer, a mask maker. Could you tell us something more about your work?
So to give you a feeling of my work, sort of my background, if it were, I emerged at a university determined to be an actor, and I really wanted to do brand new acting. I mean, somehow, when you open a play, you always see other people's names who did the play first, and I kind of wanted to be first in line to explore the material, and not walking in the shadow of somebody else. So I was really interested in creating new plays, and that's why I found myself in San Francisco, which was at that time a hotbed of the new American voice in the theater. We had Sam Shepard here, very interesting work. And so I came here for that. And then, I put together a group, and we wrote and performed our own pieces. And then I got hooked into improvisation. And then later I found that if you could take the work that I was doing in the theater into a corporate arena, you had a chance of doing transformational work. That when you leave, they don't just have new skills, they have a new idea about who they are and their relationship to the world. It felt, in addition to being sustaining. And by that, I mean by the fees paid. But it was also very gratifying to be able to go in and work with a group of people and see something transform and change. So you combine that with my theater work. I mean, I never really wanted theater to be boring. I mean, there is some theater that is fine, humorous, or just it takes up space. But there's a lot of theater that doesn't really engage. And the thing about the theater, as opposed to a book, is it engages you sort of in your heart and in your gut, sort of in your body. You sort of feel it there. It's not just an intellectual pursuit. We're sort of present with those actors. And in some way, we're on the journey with them. So my work as a trainer allowed me to do a lot of development of how I find engagement with people in my workshops, and how do I find the right tools to pull out something different and take them on a journey that'll leave them changed at the end for the better. She always change for the better.
Yeah, great story. And why you choose the improvisation as a way of working with people also in the corporate work?
Well, theater and improvisation, I'm using those terms loosely, and they overlap a lot. But also, theater skills are human dynamic skills. The improvisation skills are also skills that are about being in relationship. When we teach improvisation classes, we could say it's a social class about how to be social. We could also say it's a communication class. It's about how to talk to each other. We could also say it's a leadership class because it's about leading and supporting and following and supporting. So we call it, you and I are calling it improvisation right now, but in the workshops, I don't often call it improvisation. I'll call it leadership skills or presence or something else. The mask work is kind of sort of interesting to sort of push into that arena, but how we show up and the way we hold our faces and our hairstyles and our glasses, and for some of us, the makeup that we use and how we design the eyebrow and whether we're using color or not and how much color. I mean, it makes a difference to how we show up to others. Also, it makes a difference to how we feel about ourselves when we show up.
Good. And yeah, you mentioned the idea of masks. How it started?
Well, I got started with masks, I think probably as a child. My father uncovered some old film of me wearing a mask. In America, we have Halloween, which we celebrate by putting on masks. But I think I was really interested about it then. And then in college, I had this stupid thing where I had to take a class and I could either do a really long paper or I could do a project. And I chose project. Like, let's do a project. And my project I chose was to make a mask. And so then I started researching the mask work and how it was used in ancient times. And masks have been around since the beginning of civilization. It's found in almost every civilization as an artifact. But the curious thing to me is we don't quite know what the masks are for. If it's an artifact that's critical to civilization, what are we using it for? And why is it so important that we have masks everywhere? So it becomes very, very interesting. And then, so I started making masks. And my first company here in San Francisco was a Commedia dell'arte company, which is Italian masked Renaissance, sort of buffoon theater. But I found quickly in the performance of those masks in immersive interactive environments that the masks allow you to do things that you wouldn't normally do as you because of the protection of the mask. It's built on a very fascinating concept that the personality is not who we are. It's just what we've developed to survive out there. out in the world. But when we do mask work, we're sort of saying, here's a mask you can put on your face, which maybe will allow you to take the other mask off for a moment. And that becomes a very interesting moment when you are free from the mask that you've developed to survive. What happens when we're given a little bit of freedom there? It's a fascinating experience. And so I plan to do, if you join me in this workshop, I plan to do a little bit of mask work, what we can do as allowed by the technology.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting, but by taking on the other mask, you are at the same time taking off the one you created for your survival, as you mentioned. Yes.
Yeah.
So you give people some kind of freedom with that.
Yeah. So as a teacher, crafting that moment of safety and freedom becomes really important. It's not just knowing the exercises or having masks and saying, put this on and see what happens. You've got to create this feeling of this little tension between the safety that you can create and a kind of excitement of what will happen. And in the balance between those two, we march into the mask work.
Yeah, it's about psychological safety on one side and trust on the other to you as a trainer, probably. Yeah. So you need to create that. And what do you think, why it works in that way, that we are able to take off that mask, which we created for sometimes many, many years?
I don't know. Why does it work? I don't know. There have been plenty written about the archetypes and who we are, and the different dark side, light side of us inside. And I'm not sure I want to spend too much time in that space. I do know it's not an intellectual pursuit. It's a thing that happens. It's when you put the mask on and you look into the mirror and you see it's you, but it's someone else. It's not an intellectual process. It's something that happens to you. And it's beautiful and disorienting and liberating and a little frightening.
Can you share with the most surprising moment or exciting moment from your work with masks and people?
I'll share a couple of moments of some highlights of working. I'll share a couple of highlights of working with the masks. I've got quite a collection of masks, a lot of masks I've made. And as I've traveled around the world and met different people, I'm able to buy masks from them or get them to make me masks. And then, we expand what the masks are. A frame, glasses can be masks. What you choose to, so the idea of what is a mask and why do you wear it? What's just something small can be a mask. So, but I'll share a couple of things that happen with the masks. Over the years, there are certain masks that whoever puts them on, they always show up the same way. They always have the same sort of voice. They have the same sort of body, and they have the very similar interests. I don't know how it happens, but they do. So there are masks that I tend to rely on, like, oh, this mask it's easy for people to get into, to find it. And it's very interesting when someone's in a mask, you can really feel when the mask is talking and when they are talking through the mask. So I had one of these masks that I bring out to masks and the workshops. And at one point, this very tall gentleman wearing this mask, and it was a dark mask and had a long snout, and he was quite an imposing figure on the mask. And I'm doing a kind of provocation with the masks where I'm suggesting that they do things. I'm not asking, I'm telling them, go over here, go over there. And it's, to pull back the curtain here, it's useful to me whether they do it or don't do it. I just don't want them in that moment to be cognitively relating to me. I just, it's like, come over here. And if they say no, that's fantastic. If they say yes, that's great. So this one is looking at a table that's filled with things on top of it. Sorry, the story's a little long. So he's looking at it and looking at it and looking around at all the things. And I just gave him this kind of statement. I said, look, you know what you want to do. That's fine. Go ahead and do it. And he brushes everything off the table. It goes scattering all over the room. It was startling. I was like, yeah, that feels better. Doesn't it feel better? He goes, yeah. So then he picks up the table over his head and he comes up to me and he stands this close to me, like with the table over the head. And I stand there and I'm looking at him and I just go, yeah, you know what you want to do. Go ahead. He takes the table, he looks at me, and he turns to the side, finally, after a long pause, and he walks over a couple of steps and puts the table some other place. And I said, yeah, that's right. That's where that table needs to be. And then it took him out of the mask. I've retired that mask. I don't bring that mask out to the workshops anymore. It's pretty interesting.
Okay. I fully understand why.
It was a very powerful experience. The actor said it was extremely empowering. He loved being in that. He loved that feeling of power, knowing what to do, being given that power. And I've been teaching masks for 30, 40 years, and I've never had anybody get hurt. I've never been hurt. There's never been any incident of any sort of danger or anything like that. So
that's good.
Yeah.
I suppose.
This whole thing, I said it earlier, but it's all based on the idea that the stage, the theater, is a safe place where we can be somebody else, and then we step off the stage and it's okay. Whatever we do on stage, we were acting, we were doing the role, we were playing the part. And when we walk off stage, we are held not liable for what takes place up there. Now, that idea is confused in our world. We see your movie actors who are in action pictures and we expect them to be that kind of person. Or we see beautiful women in incredible settings and we expect them to be like that all the time. James Bond is James Bond. But so even that idea gets a little confused. And in improvisation, it continues to get confused too, because the actor is also the playwright. So when you're doing a play, you can always say, hey, the playwright wrote these words. I'm just the actor saying them. So that somewhere in there is a very interesting dynamic of this sacred place of the stage, which can be a playful place, a dangerous place, but a place where, as my mentor used to say, even the ghosts take a bow at the end of the show.
So I see here a similarity between theater improvisation and the provocative approach, because with that provocative approach, you follow the client. Yes, you need to react and you never know what can happen. Yes, you of course try to provoke him or her in some way, and you are waiting for the reaction. You are trying to check what will work. Yes.
Right. And in those moments, I'm assuming that you have consent, that you've talked about the process and say, we're going to go into this period where I provoke you, or I will. Am I right there that there's a consent moment?
Not exactly, because, in provocative approach, when you come to the session or when you come to, the therapy, and you agree for that way of working, the type of way of working, then there is no description of the process, because there is no process, yes? It's about the discussion between the therapist or coach and the client, and trying to find and encounter the emotions which will, start the process of different way of thinking, or looking for some other solutions.
But and yet it does sound like there's a moment early on where you say, where this is the way we're going to work, and then that's out of the way, and then you're doing it.
Yes, at the beginning you need to agree, yes, on that somehow, even if it's only just by coming into the session and knowing that the therapist is, using that provocative approach, ways of working. But yeah, somehow it is taught and agreed.
The theater is filled with stories about the provocative approach of directors, how directors sort of mess with the heads of the actors to get them in the right place to be able to give a truthful performance. The great director and acting teacher Grotowski said that you had to make the actors exhausted so they had no protection against the truth, that they would be more truthful. So it's a history in the theater of directors provoking the performance they want and trying to figure out how to do that.
Okay. And I've got a question also about the humor in your work. Is it important?
Well, humor is important in the work. But humor is such a big idea. It's so hard to quantify humor. Freud wrote an interesting essay trying to understand what laughter was and what created laughter. And I think he finally abandoned he published a little thing about it, but it's not tremendously insightful because it's hard to define. I think the laughter I'm interested in is the laughter of recognition, of truthfulness. And so in the work I do in improvisation, I'm not looking for clever. I'm just not looking for funny things. What I want is to pursue a more truthful and easier path. I always say the most obvious thing. Stop searching for something funny. Stop searching for something good to say. Just say what's in your mind. Say what's there. And very often that produces a kind of release, and often a laugh. So yeah, humor is important, but in a shared way. Sometimes you might go see a comedian and the comedian gets a lot of laughs by attacking the audience members or different ideologies or something. But in this case, I think the humor I'm interested in the theater is more the laugh of recognition, laugh of truth.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. In provocative approach, we use sometimes the humor, also sometimes the improvisation to exaggerate some of the situations and behavior of the client. Yes, and it gives them the other perspective to the problem. And
Okay.
that humor is, in that way, quite important, not to make it very serious as in standard psychological, methods.
As a teacher and director, I'm always attuned to the humor, and because humor is, as we know, a tool, a weapon, a disguise. So it's part of the puzzle from the way people show up and how you interact with them.
Yeah. And you mentioned about, the situation from the workshop. What was the biggest transformation or change you observed during your work?
Gosh. I just, on a personal note, I always stay away from questions that, have the biggest. What's your favorite food? What's the best thing? What's the greatest?
Or maybe the one which just stayed in your mind.
Well, the one I told you about really stayed in my mind. I was I was in this was startling for me. I was in New Orleans in the United States, which has a Mardi Gras tradition, which is masks, a lot of masks. And most of those masks are sort of mass manufactured and are sold. But I found a mask maker in New Orleans, and I found the shop before I found him, and I was traveling with my spouse, and she went to the mask maker and said, my husband's working. Can you stay open a little bit late so I can bring him here to see your masks? Mm-hmm. And he said, yes. So I got off of work that I was doing, and I came over and talked to him, and we talked for a few minutes, and I asked if I could try on a mask here and try on this mask. And I go over to the mirror and I try on the mask. So this is a nice leather mask. Yeah. So, well, I was trying on these masks, and what was I saying? I can't talk to the mask. So I'm trying on these different masks, and trying this one on and this one on, and I arranged a nice conversation. I talked with him, and we walked away, and I turned to Carla, and I said that was nice of him to keep his place open for a half hour to let me come in and try on the masks. And she looked at me and she said, "Do you think we were in there for half an hour?" And I went, "What?" And she said, "We were in there for an hour and a half. You were trying on lots of masks. That wasn't a half hour. We were in there a long time." And that was quite startling to me, that time had disappeared for me. The time was gone. So it's a kind of magic that masks have. Yeah.
Okay, and I think the last question from my side, which I've got prepared before, is about the future of, theater and improvisation. How you see it?
Oh, well, we've been saying this for a long time. The move to digital interactions and digital interactions, I think my hope, my dream is that we'll begin to see the value, the different value in human interaction. And that it'll make that the theater will be a safe way to a protected, safe way and a valued way to have this emotional journey. Sometimes I think of the theater as a place that takes you on a journey, an emotional journey that you wouldn't normally choose for yourself, that you won't normally do. I mean, we look at the story of Hamlet and it's, oh my gosh, what a tormented soul. And none of us want to be tormented like that, but going to the theater, we get to have that experience. So I'd like to think that it'll eventually live theater will become much more important. I think that the world of improvisation is a very social dynamic in the world of improvisation because you have to play together. In fact, there's an emphasis on play, and you have to see each other in order to play with each other. And there's so many different things to sort of play with there. You know, our classes at our theater in San Francisco are busy. People love to take these kinds of classes, and I think it's because they get out of their house, they go to a theater, and they get up on stage with 12 other people, and they are having human interactions that offer so much more dopamine and excitement than scrolling through another TikTok. At least that's my hope for that. And that, over the years, we've seen improvisation grow and grow, and everyone's doing it. It's in every college, it's in high schools everywhere, it's in universities, yes. And anyone can start an improv company, and why not? Get it started, do it, get together, play. So I'd like to think it's going to become much more important. Certainly when I'm talking to corporations, I talk about improvisation is about dealing with what's really there without a plan, just principles. And so much of life will benefit from having those kinds of tools to expand your tolerance for ambiguity.
Yeah, beautiful future. And you mentioned one thing which maybe I can ask also, because you mentioned principles of improvisation. And can you tell us something more about the principles?
Yeah. There's a couple of principles about improvisation, and these are all shared by improvisers all over the world. They may call them different things, and they may be in different orders of priority, but you have to be present. You have to be right here. You can't be a couple of minutes in the past. You can't be a couple of seconds in the future. You've got to continually be right here, right now. Sport is like that. You have to be present all the time for your sport. And in the same way, improvisation has that. You must be here. Secondly, you have to see what's really happening. And you have to be committed to collaborate, almost radical collaboration. You don't have anything else except you and whoever else is on stage, or you and your own imagination. So you have to engage in a collaboration, a kind of yes and. How do we yes what you're saying, what's there, and see where it goes. The image I have in my mind is that it's like pulling on a thread. Here's a little thread on my shirt. I'll keep pulling it. I don't know how long it goes. I don't know whether it's going to stick. But improvisation, you just know the next little step. Let's just follow the step. Let's take this step. Let's take this step. Let's take this step. We don't know where it's going to go, but we trust the steps, which is the next principle. We have to have trust. We have to have trust with the people we're on stage with. We have a ritual at our theater. Before we go on stage, we look at each other in the eye, we reach around and we pat each other on the back. And then we say, I've got your back. I've got your back. So these ideas of being present, seeing each other, agreeing, deciding to consciously play with the ideas with each other, and this idea that we're in it together, those are the major principles.
Yeah, thanks for that sharing. And yeah, some of them are really similar to the ones which I used in provocative approach, yes, because we also need to be present. We also need to, observe and listen to the client and accept what is coming from that person.
Right, not what you wish they were saying. We say, meet them where they are. Where are you? You have to say, where are they?
And we are adding, the humor to exaggerate, and we are adding some kind of challenge for the client, yes, to give him opportunity to change the way of thinking. So quite many similarities, finally. And I remember you were a little bit afraid what we can find, and we found a lot.
Well, once you start looking, in my corporate work, I always say, you give smart people a good question and just step back, let them work. You'll be amazed at what they come up with.
Yeah, that's right. Is there anything else, William, you would like to share?
I guess finally, I'd like to share that this is still an area of mystery for me. Now, I think that's why I'm still interested in it. I don't quite understand it. I've been doing it for a long time, and there's so much that's still a mystery to me about the way humans relate to each other off stage and on stage. How do we allow ourselves to get into this state where we are playful with each other or committed to this moment of real-time interaction? Yeah, it's still a mystery to me.
That's great, and great that you still are in that, yes, because you do really great job.
It's funny, in improvisation, we see people come and then they do it for several years and they go, well, I've done that. I look at that and I go, really? Okay. All right. There's so much there.
They don't see that mystery and they are, still looking for some new experiences. Or they are not going deeper with that. You've got also the psychological background, yes, so that gives you probably a little bit different perspective